Hello everyone, this is Brian with the Bad Manners Podcast. I'm going to be reacting to a video from Etacude English teachers regarding kids not being able to read. My degree is in elementary and special education, so this is something I know about, and I have worked as a teacher. So I'm going to react to whatever it is we're about to see. Let's get into it.
All of these are associated with a balanced literacy approach. Now, the problem with this is now we know that none of these help kids read.
You're supposed to be able to engage with a piece of text and say, I think the intended audience is blank.
47 million Americans, or about 1 in 7, have a reading level below 5th grade and are functionally illiterate.
I taught middle school with my 8th graders, about half of them. There was approximately 40 of them, small school. Of about 20 of them were safely 4th grade level or lower. Of those that were not that far behind, if I recall correctly, at the beginning of the year we only had approximately 3 students on grade level. The rest were all at least 1 year behind. So, at least at the school I taught at, the reading difficulties were real. It took a lot of work, a lot of pushing them. They did come up appreciably, but the students had to be worked harder than they'd ever been worked before, which naturally meant by the end of the year they didn't like me, but it's a case of the students themselves have become so thoroughly mired in a circumstance where they're used to seeing all this mediocrity surrounding them that they're not aware of how bad their situation is. So let's see what some of the other experiences are out there, but I'm going to guess they're about as bad as mine was.
Teachers are sounding the alarm why kids can't read anymore. There's something happening in schools right now, and teachers across the country keep saying the same thing. Kids can't read. Not just a little behind. We're talking about 3rd graders struggling with basic sentences, middle schoolers avoiding reading out loud, and teachers asking.
Middle schoolers avoiding reading out loud is very much a real phenomenon. It is a situation where even decoding can be problematic, which is tragic because decoding should just be what I'd call the crunch side of it. It's just a skill. The reading comprehension is supposed to be the difficult part where, yeah, they decode it, but do they even know what happened? What did they just decode? When they can't even get to the point where they can begin to engage with the reading comprehension side of things, it's a disaster. And the natural result is, however bad their reading is, the writing is infinitely worse because they haven't developed any of the cognitive skills needed to be able to read in the first place. Therefore, they don't develop all the metacognitive skills that are involved with thinking about understanding what you just read. And in turn, they absolutely lack the ability to write about anything. You can tell a student to write a paragraph about their own life, and you will get some disasters.
How did we get here? Today, I'm reacting to real teachers explaining what they're seeing inside their classrooms. Phonics, literacy levels, and the reading foundations kids are missing. Let's get into it.
This has to be one of my biggest regrets as a kindergarten teacher. I'll never forget the time that I was sitting in the classroom. I think it was my 2nd year of teaching, and I was sitting with one of the moms who was upset and crying. Her son wasn't progressing, he wasn't moving levels, he wasn't remembering all of these sight words. And I gave her this chart. Now, this was something I was trained in, and this is something that they were really pushing in the schools. Now, the chart looked like something like this.
That just looks like bad pedagogy. Obviously, I'm a bit older. When I learned how to read, it was all phonics-based to start with, sounding out words if necessary. The old school stuff that we know worked, but they tried to get away with it, or away from it in more recent times. It's one of those cases where literacy was beginning to struggle, and they began to look at it from the perspective of, oh, it must be the teaching methodology. Maybe there's a better way to teach this. And one of the things they really drum into your head when you're going through your teacher preparation program in college is that it's always about research-based practices. You always want to be up to date on what research says is best practice. And research-based practice tends to take this pessimistic view of older models, because I swear these studies that they do are chiefly designed to produce some new method of doing things that'll enable stuff to be sold. Because the old ways of doing things always come across as being this punching bag that's just meant to be set up and look plainly familiar to this new shiny way of doing things. And money being the motivator can be the only possible explanation, because a lot of these times you read these studies, and in general, especially as it involves human learning, if they don't pass the logic test, they're probably not very good. And many of these so-called scholarly studies that are supposed to underline what best practices, a lot of them are at best described as junk science. But as teachers, we're supposed to abide by it anyway. And also to simultaneously disregard stuff that we know worked because it was done for decades upon decades. But another reason they might try to do this stuff is we know there's achievement gaps with certain populations, and therefore they develop this kind of idea that, oh, it can't be anything else than the manner of teaching is insufficient. So they try to find one-size-fits-all approaches that will benefit everybody much better. This is one of the reasons that one of the biggest buzzwords when it comes to teaching nowadays is universal design for learning. The fact that this was sold to teachers as something good and useful because some clown, well, not a clown, the person that came up with it for architecture, good job, they came up with something good for architecture. The clown was the person that was like, let's take this architectural concept, apply it to teaching, and now you can design lessons that are suitable for everybody. When any educator or person that's ever taught somebody anything, you can't design a one-size-fits-all that fits for everybody. A good educator is going to be able to adapt based on individual need as they go.
I don't know if this looks familiar to you, but it probably does. Look at the picture, guess the word and move on. Look at the first letter. All of these are associated with a balanced literacy approach. Now, the problem with this is now we know that none of these help kids read. They are actually detrimental to their growth, leaving millions.
Decoding is a skill. Anything that, especially for kindergartners, if you're not teaching them to make sense of what those graphemes sound like, you're not going to get any actual reading, because they won't be able to look at the symbol, make the sound, connect it to a word that they've heard, and now suddenly it makes sense to them. All the modern literacy approaches are stupid, but it's more so an indictment of the entire education industrial complex that it was ever taken seriously to begin with. All the people in positions of authority that allowed that model to ever move forward means that they never applied a logic test to any of these things coming out. It was all about the dollar signs all the way down. And there's a lot of money to be made bilking the education industrial complex, because if you give them one bad practice that they purchased, well, it fails. You can produce more studies with a new practice, and that can fail too. And it's like planned obsolescence, but sacrificing entire generations in the process.
Millions of kids behind. Not just kids who are dyslexic, millions and millions of kids missing information and gaps in their reading. So back to this mom, I was sitting with her and she was in tears. What can I do? I'm so nervous that my child is not going to succeed.
It's cool she's got a parent that cares, but I'm going to be honest. If that kid ain't reading, even if just a tiny bit, by the time they enter kindergarten, that parent has already messed up. I'm not any kind of savant or gifted in any way whatsoever, but I was able to do some reading pre-kindergarten, and that's just simply because time was spent on the subject before I entered school. Every kid should be able to do it, or should already have the fundamentals firmly in place. And teaching reading's not some tremendously difficult obstacle. Well, unless you're using modern research-based practices, parents can absolutely teach this stuff. And given parents are a child's first educator, they should be. Because if a kid enters kindergarten already being able to read at least a little bit, they're already going to find the rest of school to be greatly eased for them. But there's at the school I used to be at, there's a kindergarten teacher been teaching 30 years, and she runs into the phenomena now that she has kids entering kindergarten that they're not even potty trained, which is nutty in its own right. But they don't even have the faintest idea of what any of the ABCs are, and that's just widespread parental failure.
They are not moving levels. They are not remembering these words. And I looked at her and I said, there's got to be a better way.
Remembering words or acquiring any vocabulary words, that's partially just practice. If the parent's not reinforcing that stuff at home, guess what? The kid's not going to treat it as important, and it'll be filtered straight out of their mind as they shift their attention onto other things, like their iPad.
And that's when I knew we needed to teach kids the phonics. That I couldn't figure out why we were telling kids to look at the word and guess it.
Research-based practices.
Because as the books get more complicated, that doesn't make sense. There are less pictures on the page, the words don't match up to the pictures, and sometimes those words seem a little bit complicated. And of course they're going to be complicated if you don't know the rules behind them.
Honestly, this is a big one. For years, phonics was pushed aside in favor of balanced literacy. Kids were encouraged to guess words using pictures or context instead of actually decoding them.
The United States had solved literacy a long time ago, and phonics was the way. Even then, people knew that reading didn't come naturally as a skill to people, because the whole balanced literacy instruction is based on this very faulty premise that reading is a skill that comes natural to people. Clearly, anybody familiar with history would know it's absolutely not, which is why illiteracy was so prevalent in previous centuries. It's something that in order to cultivate in a person needs consistent, rigorous work. And toward that end, humans had centuries to figure out what works for actually teaching literacy, and phonics, of course, is a big part of it, because you've got this symbol called a grapheme that represents a sound. You're seeing that symbol into a sound, linking it with other symbols and sounds, and eventually it forms a word, and you're like, oh, I know this word because I use words in speech. So
it works until the texts get harder. Reading isn't natural like speaking. It has to be taught systematically. If kids never learn how letters and sounds actually work together, they hit a wall very quickly. If the foundation is weak in kindergarten and first grade, everything after that becomes survival mode. Let's look at some of the comments. My son is in second grade, and because of the pandemic, he didn't get proper education for kindergarten, and now he's struggling with reading.
The parent needs to be looking themselves long and hard in the mirror. Teachers are the second educator in a child's life. Number one is the parent. They should have been, as I just said, that kid should have already had some fundamental skills laid down before kindergarten. And then if he didn't learn anything during the pandemic, the parent should have been there reinforcing it. A kid is only going to take his education as seriously as the parent does. Going from experience with parents, I had a parent that refused to have their student try for more than a C. You just have parents that don't understand that your kid is only going to rise to the level you set for them.
I would also have to say, as parents, we have to educate ourselves. Not a parent yet, working on it. As future parents or parents, we have to educate ourselves in phonics and how to teach our students. I was told this by my daughter's first grade teacher, and I was appalled. She told me, we don't sound it out anymore. We just tell them to guess and move on.
And this is research-based practice, everybody. Some researcher spat out a study that said that this was superior to phonics instruction. It is not difficult to envision drawing up some kind of test you would administer to the groups that would produce an outcome where the balanced literacy instruction gave a higher, or the appearance of better performance. I really wish, but it will never happen, that those that were responsible for overseeing educational institutions and curriculum had a thorough understanding of logic and a fundamental grounding in what does and doesn't work logically for instruction or teaching people anything, because it would allow stupid things like this balanced literacy instruction to have never taken foot in the first place.
Oh, horrible.
A very interesting thing about this cultural and societal moment we're in, where we're realizing that people don't have reading comprehension skills, like very basic reading.
They frequently don't even have decoding skills, and you need those before you can even begin to comprehend what you're reading.
Comprehension skills is that people forget part of reading comprehension is being able to infer the intended audience of a piece of text without the author telling you directly.
There's a whole lot of cognitive and metacognitive skills that are supposed to be involved in reading comprehension. That's just one of them. One of the things that I've noticed on the reading comprehension side of things, let's assume they can decode and read out loud to you if they need to. A lot of these kids do not have any kind of background knowledge, so no social, very low levels of having socially interacted, very little attempts to experience the world on their own. So when it comes to things like inferring what something is for, that skill could and should be initially obtained through socialization. You see people communicating in their communications. You're able to start gleaning an idea of what it looks like when that communication is for someone or trying to achieve something. So basically, when you have these children who are far less socialized for one reason or another, and given the lack of socialization, they don't have that skill. They're also not particularly proficient at reading. They haven't been interacting with their environment. You end up with situations where they're not going to be able to comprehend anything because there's no foundational knowledge to use to comprehend it.
Did you know that you're supposed to be able to do that? You're supposed to be able to engage with a piece of text and say, I think the intended audience is blank. You are not supposed to need clarifications at the beginning of a text saying, now obviously I'm not talking about A, B, C, and D. You're supposed to be able to figure that out on your own, right? And so when you request those clarifications of saying, now make sure you say you're not talking about X, Y, and Z group, you lack reading comprehension skills. Does that make sense? Like, that's a skill you're supposed to have, and it seems like most people don't, and that goes hand in hand with reading comprehension.
The foundational groundwork for that one comes in the form of socialization, because that's where you begin to figure out who certain kinds of communication or speech is intended for.
Even when students can technically read the words, they don't always understand what they're reading. They struggle with things like audience or purpose, inference. That's deep comprehension, and it only develops through a lot of reading and thinking. If students aren't reading consistently, that skill just never grows. Let's see some of the comments. It says here, some commented on a cooking video. I literally can't eat this. I'm allergic. Like what? The whataboutism. It drives me crazy. I think it says a lot about someone if you make a general statement and then they say, well, what about this? And
you know, it's interesting. This is in the context of course, of teaching. Whataboutism is in that same vein of believing a person is more intelligent than they actually are. Once you get to people that have developed a more well-rounded understanding of anything, the whataboutism disappears because you learn to operate along the law of averages. You don't let exceptions ruin a more broad point that contains general truth, because the exceptions don't reveal anything meaningful other than that they are a minor possibility. So, to anybody that ever does the, well, what about, just know that if you're trying to appeal to something that deviates from the law of averages concerning any topic, you're immediately going to be discounted by anybody that's trying to take that conversation seriously.
Give a really limited answer that affects a small group of people. Like you would say, like, many people in the Netherlands are tall. And they would immediately start by saying, well, I've seen some short people in the Netherlands. Like, no, it's a generalization, and we don't always have to contradict what someone says.
Generalizations are important for being able to sort information as a person. It makes your actions within your environment far more reliable. Attempting to cater one's actions off of the things that are less likely to occur is pretty much a recipe for failure.
Anyone else struggling to reconcile with the fact that there's a significant portion of Americans who are just insane?
In 2022 and 2023, the National Literacy Institute reported that 54% of U.S. adults have a literacy below 6th grade.
That is a country that is speedrunning collapse. That or it's speedrunning tyranny. You cannot have an informed populace that's able to effectively vote on people that propose solutions to problems that'll actually work. If you're not literate, you have no idea how anything functions beyond whatever mechanical tasks you can accomplish yourself.
Meaning that they have a tough time reading and spelling words like flammable, institution, sympathetic, psychology, and also that 47 million Americans, or about 1 in 7, have a reading level below 5th grade and are functionally illiterate.
I believe it.
And that 21% of them are illiterate. That's your reasoning, not that they're insane.
When you hear statistics like half of Americans read at around a 6th grade level, it sounds dramatic. But then teachers look at what's happening in classrooms and think, maybe it's not exaggerated. Literacy isn't just about books. It's about functioning in society, filling out forms, understanding contracts, evaluating information online. If literacy drops, everything becomes harder. Let's look at some of the comments. It says here, before submitting a vote, there needs to be a recapture. So you're trying to tell me, as a German, I read and understand English better than more than 50% of American adults?
I think if you controlled for ethnic groups in the United States, you'd probably see those numbers look appreciably better. It's a lot like our supposed gun violence epidemic. Once you control for ethnic group, everything looks very different. Given that I am an educator, I live in a state that is very Hispanic. The ones that are Hispanic very frequently are substantially below grade level in their English proficiency. Not least because quite a few of them do not see a reason to need to learn English, since they're able to stay in a group that is Spanish only, whether it be at school or in society. And they'll even tell you straight up that they don't see a need to learn English.
Literacy rates are down because people who've never read a book are having kids. It's that simple. Yes, there's the rise of AI. Yes, there's the whole kids are using tablets in school more than they've ever used it before. But it's more than that, because reading, it starts at home, okay? When I was teaching back in my day, literally last year, I was teaching 6th graders, and they had the reading level and vocabulary of like some of the 3rd graders that I was working with, okay? A lot of people
at least with the middle schoolers, their vocabularies are extraordinarily stunted. They use approximately the same 50 words maybe for all of their communications throughout the day. And then even within those 50 words, they're usually just slang words. Their command of English is tenuous at best, and this is even among people that are English-only students. So it's absolutely no surprise that this teacher's had a similar experience.
Have kids just to have kids, because it's like one of the easiest things you can do. It's one of the few times a woman is told that someone's proud of them. Okay,
R selection versus K selection is a very real phenomena. If anybody wants to read about that,
you can tell when some of them have never read a book in the day in their life. I've met some of these parents myself. They don't do the whole reading at home. They expect you to bring your child to school and just, hey, teach them. They're supposed to know these things.
The phenomena of thinking that teachers are responsible for the education of their child is too real. I said it earlier, teachers are supposed to be the second educator in a child's life. Number one is and always will be the parent. But too many parents completely absolve themselves of any responsibility for teaching their own child. So any success or failure of that student is put entirely on the teachers, which is farcical, because any teacher will tell you if you're dealing with a student who has extremely invested parents, that's always going to be your top performer. And I mean extremely invested from the perspective that the parents work with them at home too. Not just a case of them telling the kid to do their homework and that they need to get good grades. That's not being the first educator in your child's life. It at least instills a sense of values that education is important. but it's nowhere close to the effectiveness of actually having a parent work with their kid on learning anything. You don't even need to be a phenomenally talented parent. At least work with them in those first couple years where I'm assuming your average adult has got at least a third grade education they can remember. Although sometimes I wonder even about that.
But the reading and the fundamentals of reading happen at home. Like my mother used to read to me as a child. I used to go to the library during the summer, spending time reading books. Your child not being able to spell, read, or write, a lot of that comes from never picking up a book. Think about it at birthday parties. People bring toys, video games for the kid, all these. Nobody ever brings a book when they're like, oh, happy birthday, here's a book. Nobody ever brings that. And I know you can't help the rise of AI and using computers in the classroom.
This video is not really for that, but AI in the classroom is an absolute disaster. It needs to be abolished. Maybe at some point I'll review another video where I get to go more into how AI should be used in academics. But suffice to say, it should not be used at the very low levels for absolute certain. And then as far as computers in the classroom, they seem to be more deleterious to student outcomes than good. They do make it easier for the teachers. There's less stuff to print. Everything's concentrated right there. So from the perspective of being a lazy teacher, it's nice, but that's about it.
Because when I work with elementary school students, they have to use it for everything. But a lot of you guys actually don't read. You don't care about reading. You've never done it yourself. I don't know why you're shocked when you're like, oh my gosh, my child's not reading. And if you're one of those people who grew up and you were like, my parents didn't read to me and I love reading, you're not who I'm talking to.
This is uncomfortable, but it matters. If reading isn't modeled at home, it becomes something that school forces kids to do. The biggest predictor of literacy is exposure and consistency.
The video is about literacy, but look at it from the mathematics angle. How many parents are at home really driving into their kids and work with their kids on math, but also get across how math is important? Instill in them a sense of the value of math. Because in particular, and it's a common refrain, the parents don't really see a need for it other than whatever grades associated with it. Well, reading has a similar thing too. The kid is going to believe that skill or activity is as important as however much their emphasis their parent places on it. And the parents of these students who struggle with reading are not invested in their students' reading. And yeah, it may well be the case that they were never good readers themselves. But if a person's able to get by pretty well in life, or at least enough that their lack of being able to read never really punished them, it's not that surprising that they're not really putting in the work to ensure that their kid does better.
Read to, seeing your parents read, having books around the house. You can't replace that with a Chromebook. Let's look at the comments. Not only do the parents not read, they simply don't think reading is important. My parents were immigrants who couldn't speak English and were working so much they themselves didn't read, but they heavily pushed the importance of reading and education. I'm very lucky to have parents like that.
If for some reason you are that overworked that you don't have the ability to be the first teacher at home, yeah, you better be emphasizing the importance of literacy, reading, and education. Because otherwise your kid's going to end up being a copy of you at best.
And that's just the beginning of the problem. Because when kids struggle with reading, something else happens. They start avoiding it completely. In the next video, we'll look...
Oh, that was a real point he just made. As students become aware that it's a skill they lack, they develop a strong aversion to it, and they'll start finding behaviors that enables them to get out of it. And so you see students behaviorally lashing out and finding ways to be disruptive if they know that they might be having to read soon. But there's nothing, as a teacher in a classroom, there's nothing you can really do about that. If you're in 8th grade, having to teach 8th grade standards, and you know that you got a kid that can't read at all, at that point, the only thing you can do is just make sure you don't call on him or have any occasion for him to read things out loud. I remember I had a student that I had to give everything orally because he couldn't read at all.
Looking at what teachers say students do when they are embarrassed about their reading ability.
It would be all well and fine if it was just isolated cases of embarrassing the reading. There's a kind of cultural shift where now there's so many of them that can't read that it's all this big in-group joke, and they all feed off of the fact that none of them can read. And that's its own cultural danger, because it's pretty much guaranteeing that they're going to be this permanent social underclass. Whatever future prospects they have are immediately handicapped by virtue of the fact that they don't have this foundational skill, but they also feel like they've got social validation from not having it, which further disincentivizes them from ever acquiring it in the first place. So when they talk about stuff like the school-to-prison pipeline, that's where it really kicks in. It is students that they don't have the skills to function in wider society. Other than that, it was a good video. It was by Etacude English teachers. Give them a like, follow, subscribe if you're into teaching related things. If you liked anything I had to say, like, follow, subscribe. Have a good night.